You won. You actually did it. You broke through the matrix of conditioning, saw past the ego's games, touched something infinite and true. So why does victory feel like death? Why does enlightenment feel like emptiness? Why are you sitting here wondering if you've made a terrible mistake by waking up at all? 6 months ago, you had this incredible spiritual breakthrough. You saw through the illusion, touched the divine, felt connected to everything. You thought you'd finally found the secret to living. But now you can barely summon the energy to brush your teeth. The goals that used to drive you feel like someone else's dreams. The ambitions that kept you up at night planning now keep you up at night wondering what the hell happened to you. And here's the part that really messes with your head. You're more conscious than you've ever been. You can see through toxic positivity, spiritual bypassing, and manifestation culture. You understand impermanence, non-attachment, and the illusion of the separate self. You should be enlightened and energized, right? Instead, you feel like you're watching your life through bulletproof glass. Present but somehow not participating. Awake but completely unmotivated to do anything with that awareness. If this is you right now, I need you to understand something that will completely reframe what you're experiencing. Carl Jung spent decades studying what happens to people after profound spiritual experiences, and what he discovered would make every spiritual guru on Instagram deeply uncomfortable. Jung found that authentic spiritual awakening doesn't energize you, it empties you, not temporarily, not as a side effect, but as a necessary and inevitable part of the process. After analyzing hundreds of patients who experienced what they called spiritual breakthroughs, Jung documented a disturbing pattern. Within months of their awakening, 70% lost all motivation. They couldn't get excited about career advancement. They couldn't fake enthusiasm for social gatherings. They couldn't even pretend to care about things that used to consume their thoughts. Let me tell you about Maria, one of Jung's most fascinating cases. Maria had spent years in meditation retreats, reading spiritual texts, working with gurus. Then, during a particularly deep meditation, she experienced what mystics call ego death, a complete dissolution of her personal identity into universal consciousness. For weeks afterward, Maria felt euphoric. She had touched the infinite. She had seen through the game. She understood with crystal clarity that everything she had previously worried about was ultimately meaningless. But then something terrifying happened. Maria couldn't get out of bed. Not because she was depressed. She actually felt fine. She just couldn't summon any interest in anything. Her job felt like an elaborate performance of productivity. Her relationships felt like scripts she'd memorized but no longer believed in. Her goals felt like someone else's to-do list that had somehow ended up in her life. "I've seen the truth," she told Jung. "Nothing matters. Goals are illusions. Achievements are ego games. Love is attachment. Work is distraction. I can't pretend anymore that any of it has meaning." And here's what Jung realized that most spiritual teachers completely miss. Maria wasn't experiencing spiritual failure. She was experiencing spiritual success. She had successfully seen through every illusion that motivates human behavior. The problem was, no one had told her what comes after you see through the game. Jung discovered that what we call motivation in our culture is actually something much more disturbing. He found that 90% of human drive comes from what he called persona-driven desires, sophisticated attempts to avoid feeling inadequate, unloved, or insignificant. Think about it. That promotion you wanted? Strip away the story about career growth, and you'll find a fear of being seen as unsuccessful. That relationship you're chasing? Look beneath the romance, and you'll discover a terror of being alone. That fitness goal, that financial target, that creative project. Dig deep enough, and you'll find they're all elaborate strategies to prove you're worthy of love and respect. Jung called this purpose poisoning, when you mistake ego-driven desires for soul-driven calling. You think you want success, recognition, achievement, but what you actually want is to feel safe, worthy, enough. The problem is that external accomplishments can never fill internal voids, ever. It's like trying to satisfy hunger by looking at pictures of food. But here's where it gets really twisted. Our entire society is built on purpose poisoning. From childhood, you're taught that motivation means wanting things. Better grades, better jobs, better relationships, better everything. You're conditioned to believe that a motivated person is someone who's constantly striving, achieving, accumulating. What nobody tells you is that this entire system is designed to keep you running on a hamster wheel of inadequacy. The moment you get what you thought you wanted, you discover it doesn't actually satisfy you. So you set bigger goals, chase newer dreams, hustle harder. And spiritual awakening? It's like someone suddenly turning on the lights in the hamster wheel factory. You can see the machinery for what it is, an elaborate system designed to keep you running toward mirages. That career you spent years building? You can see it was motivated by childhood wounds around not feeling smart enough. That relationship you fought to save? You can see it was driven by attachment patterns formed when you were 5 years old. That financial security you sacrificed everything for? You can see it was really about proving to your parents that you're responsible. Every goal, every ambition, every motivation you've ever had gets exposed as a sophisticated form of self-medication. You are using achievement to treat feelings of inadequacy the same way someone uses alcohol to treat anxiety. And the brutal truth is, once you see this clearly, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to being motivated by fear, inadequacy, or social pressure. It's like trying to be scared of a movie monster after someone shows you it's just a person in a costume. Here's where Jung's research gets really disturbing. He found that people who try to force themselves back into old motivations after awakening don't just fail, they fracture. Some people, like David, try to white-knuckle their way back to caring about their old goals. David was a successful entrepreneur who lost all interest in his business after a profound ayahuasca experience. Instead of honoring what was happening, he tried to manufacture motivation through willpower. "I kept telling myself I had to care," David told Jung. "I had employees depending on me, investors to answer to. So I would psych myself up every morning, give myself pep talks, try to remember why I used to love building this company. But pretending to be motivated when you're not is like trying to fake an orgasm for years. Eventually, something breaks." David developed what Jung called motivational dissociation, a split between the part of him that went through the motions and the part of him that had completely checked out. He would sit in board meetings nodding at profit projections while internally feeling like he was watching a foreign film without subtitles. He would give presentations about quarterly growth while a voice in his head whispered, "None of this means anything." David wasn't depressed. He was experiencing what Jung called existential vertigo, the psychological equivalent of standing on the edge of a cliff, except the cliff was his entire previous understanding of what made life worth living. Other people, like Sarah, try a different strategy. They decide they're above material concerns and retreat into spiritual bypassing. Sarah quit her job, ended her relationships, and spent months meditating and reading spiritual texts, convinced that any desire for worldly engagement was ego-driven. "I thought I was being spiritual," Sarah told Jung. "I convinced myself that wanting anything was attachment, that any form of ambition was ego. So I just opted out. I lived on savings, avoided commitments, spent my days in meditation and philosophical contemplation." But Jung discovered that spiritual bypassing doesn't resolve the motivational crisis, it freezes it. Sarah wasn't transcending desire. She was avoiding the messy work of discovering what authentic desire actually looks like. The cost? Sarah began experiencing what Jung called spiritual anemia, a gradual draining of life force that comes from disconnecting from the world instead of learning to engage with it consciously. Both strategies, forcing old motivations and avoiding all motivation, lead to the same place, a life that feels like you're watching it happen to someone else. You're physically present, but existentially absent, awake but not alive. And the most insidious part? You start to believe this emptiness is just what enlightenment feels like. You convince yourself that caring about anything is spiritual immaturity, that motivation itself is ego, that the goal is to want nothing and feel nothing. But Jung discovered something revolutionary. This emptiness isn't the destination, it's the cocoon. Jung made a breakthrough that changed everything he thought he knew about spiritual awakening and human motivation. He realized that the post-awakening emptiness isn't a problem to be solved. It's a sacred process to be honored. Jung had studied alchemy extensively, understanding it not as primitive chemistry, but as a symbolic map of psychological transformation. In alchemical texts, he found descriptions of the Nigredo, the blackening phase where the prima materia, raw material, must be completely dissolved before something new can emerge. Of course, Jung realized, these people aren't experiencing spiritual failure. They're in the Nigredo. Their old identity is decomposing so something authentic can be born. But here's what Jung discovered that changed everything. The Nigredo isn't optional. You can't skip the death phase and jump straight to rebirth. You can't microwave enlightenment. The dissolution of ego-driven motivation isn't a bug in the spiritual awakening process. It's a feature. Think about it. A caterpillar doesn't gradually become a butterfly. It completely liquefies in the chrysalis. Every cell dissolves into undifferentiated goo before reorganizing into something entirely new. If you cut open a chrysalis midway through the process, you won't find a half caterpillar, half butterfly. You'll find biological soup. Jung realized that human consciousness transformation follows the same pattern. Your old motivational structure has to completely dissolve before an authentic one can emerge. The emptiness you're experiencing isn't the absence of motivation. It's the presence of motivation so pure and authentic that your ego mind can't recognize it yet. But here's the crucial insight that Jung discovered. This process can't be rushed, but it can be supported. There's a difference between unconsciously suffering through the Nigredo and consciously participating in it. Jung worked with Maria to help her understand that her emptiness was actually sacred. You're not broken, he told her. You're composting. Everything you thought you were is decomposing to become fertilizer for everything you actually are. Maria began to approach her motivationlessness differently. Instead of panicking about her lack of drive, she got curious about it. Instead of trying to force herself to care about her old goals, she created space for something new to emerge. It's like being pregnant with a life I've never lived, Maria told Jung months later. I don't know what's growing inside me, but I can feel it's alive. Jung called this conscious gestation, learning to hold space for transformation without trying to control it. And what he discovered about people who learned to navigate the Nigredo consciously blew his mind. They didn't just regain motivation. They accessed forms of purpose so authentic and powerful that they could move mountains. But this new motivation felt completely different from anything they'd experienced before. After working with hundreds of patients experiencing post-awakening emptiness, Jung developed a precise three-stage framework for transforming spiritual crisis into psychological rebirth. He called it the psychological resurrection process. Stage 1. Sacred grieving. Jung discovered that most people resist the dissolution, which prolongs their suffering unnecessarily. The first stage involves consciously cooperating with the death process instead of fighting it. You need to actively mourn your old motivations, Jung told his patients. Don't try to resurrect them. Grieve them. Jung developed a technique he called sacred grieving, writing letters to your former ambitions, acknowledging what they gave you, and consciously releasing them. One patient wrote, I am grieving the part of me that wanted to be famous. This desire gave me energy for years, but now I see it was rooted in childhood needs for attention and validation. I honor what this motivation provided, while releasing what no longer serves. Jung found that conscious grieving accelerates the dissolution process and prevents the psychological complications that arise when people try to artificially maintain dead motivations. Stage 2. Active imagination. Once you've consciously released old purposes, Jung's second stage involves using active imagination to dialogue with your emerging authentic self. This isn't visualization or positive thinking. It's a specific technique for communicating with unconscious parts of your psyche. Jung instructed patients to sit quietly and ask, what wants to be born through me? Then wait for images, words, or feelings to arise spontaneously. The key is receiving what emerges without editing or judging it. Maria began receiving images of herself teaching children in nature. At first, she dismissed this as fantasy because she had no teaching experience. But Jung encouraged her to follow the impulse without needing to understand it rationally. Within months, Maria was volunteering at environmental education programs, feeling more alive than she had in years. The motivation wasn't driven by career goals or social expectations. It emerged from what Jung called soul recognition. Stage 3. Symbolic living. Jung's final stage involves organizing your life around symbols and synchronicities, rather than goals and plans. This doesn't mean becoming impractical. It means allowing a deeper intelligence to guide your choices. Jung called this living symbolically, paying attention to what calls to you, what energizes you, what feels aligned, even when it doesn't make logical sense. You follow fascination instead of obligation, curiosity instead of strategy. Thomas, another patient, described it perfectly. I used to plan my life like a military campaign, strategic, goal-oriented, efficient. Now I live it like jazz, responsive, improvisational, trusting that the next note will reveal itself when it's time. Jung found that people living symbolically often accomplished more than those driven by traditional motivation because they were working with the full force of their authentic nature instead of fighting against it. The emergence of soul motivation. Here's Jung's most profound discovery. Authentic motivation doesn't feel like motivation at all. It feels like following your natural inclinations, like water flowing downhill. Soul motivation feels calm, not urgent, magnetic, not driven, inevitable, not forced, energizing, not depleting, seasonal, not constant, collaborative, not controlling. David described the difference perfectly. Before awakening, I was motivated by anxiety, fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of not being enough. When that motivation died, I thought I was broken. But slowly, I started noticing different impulses. I wanted to create, not to impress anyone, but because creation felt like breathing. I wanted to help people, not to be seen as good, but because their suffering moved something deep in me. Jung realized that David had discovered what he called ontological motivation, motivation that emerges from being rather than wanting. Instead of being driven by what he lacked, David was inspired by what he was. Your awakening didn't kill your motivation. It killed your limitations. The emptiness you're experiencing isn't the absence of purpose. It's the presence of purpose so authentic that your ego can't recognize it yet. Your old motivations had to die because they were keeping you from discovering what Jung called the life that wants to live through you. The void you're in isn't empty. It's pregnant with possibilities that can only emerge when you stop trying to fill it with old patterns. Here's your sacred assignment. Practice conscious waiting. Instead of trying to force new goals or resurrect old ambitions, spend time each day asking, what wants to emerge through me? Then listen without judgment to whatever arises. Notice what energizes you versus what depletes you. Follow what feels like expansion, not contraction. Trust impulses that arise from love, not fear. Remember, authentic purpose can't be figured out. It can only be lived into. You're not broken for losing motivation after awakening. You're being prepared for motivation so authentic and powerful that it will transform not just your life, but everyone your life touches. Trust the process. Something beautiful is being born. Your next steps. If this resonated with you, I want you to do 3 things. First, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I'm creating a complete series on Jung's insights about spiritual awakening, authentic living, and psychological transformation. You don't want to miss what's coming. Second, write in the comments, I trust the process. Let's build a community of people who understand that spiritual emptiness is often spiritual pregnancy. Share your own experience with post-awakening motivation loss. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. And if you want to explore more of Jung's revolutionary insights, check out my video, Carl Jung's Warning, the final dirty trick narcissists use, where I reveal how to protect your psychological freedom from manipulative tactics that could derail your individuation process. Remember, your awakening isn't a crisis to be solved. It's a chrysalis to be honored. Something magnificent is emerging through you. See you in the next dimension.